Well, hello, everybody. I'm Ted Gardner, and I'm an interviewer for the Veterans Project here at the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. And this is the 12th day of July, 2007. Can't believe it, can we? And we have the honor of interviewing today Elizabeth, or as she said, she'd like to be called Betty Stewart. And our camera operator is Dennis Daly. He's with the history department of our great library here, and this is the most wonderful history department you'll ever find. And Betty, I like to get started. You realize now that you're on camera, and you're going to see the DVD, the result of this, and your family will see it, and I hope they'll be delighted. I know they'll be delighted to see you and to hear what you have to say. Where were you born, Betty?
Newark, New Jersey.
Newark, New Jersey. Oh my golly! And did you go start elementary school there and everything?
Mm-hmm.
You went through elementary
and up through the 10th grade, and then I was sent away to school.
Oh, you were.
And I went to school then in outside of Baltimore, and then to another school in New Hope, Pennsylvania.
Oh,
and then I went to college after that.
Oh, right. What kind of a family did you come from? You have brothers and sisters?
I was the middle of three, younger and older brother. My father was a judge in New Jersey.
Oh my.
My mother was a native of Frankfort, Kentucky.
Good Kentucky girl. Yeah, well, that's wonderful. Well, you certainly came from fine stock. There's no question about that. So you went away to private school after the 10th grade?
Yeah, I only went to private school. I never went to a public school.
Oh, you never went to public school? Well, that's
just what happened to you back then.
Yes, I know that. Well, that certainly was a great background for you. After high school, then you went right into college, did you?
Yes.
Where did you go?
I went to Vassar in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Oh my golly, isn't that something, I should say. Well, there are a lot of Vassarites around this territory. Do you go to the Vassar Club?
There isn't a Vassar Club here anymore.
Oh, there isn't anymore.
Just isn't functioning.
Okay.
There's Vassar graduates. Nobody in my class, but.
I see. May I ask you what year you were born?
I was born in 1923.
1923. Okay.
I'm 84.
Right. Those were great days. And as you, I can remember the 20s very well. And when you say that to somebody today,
I don't remember the 20s very well. I think good for you if you do.
Well, what did you study at Vassar?
I majored in art history.
Art history. Ah, I hope there was a good market for you in those days.
Well, I wanted to be an architect, really.
Oh.
But when I got out of the Navy, and my recollection is I applied at Yale and Pennsylvania and MIT, I was turned down by all three because they were saving all their spots for men who had been in service.
Coming out of the war.
And I said, but I've been in service. And they said, oh, too bad.
Too bad. Oh,
wouldn't that happen now?
Isn't that ironic, though, I should say? Well, then, when did you go into the Navy?
Right from college, immediately.
So that would have been, 1943, 44?
44.
44. You graduated in the class of 44.
And we graduated early in March, I think.
Oh, yeah.
They were accelerating everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think that I went to Smith for officer training school, and I think I went in May and graduated in July.
So, of course, with your college degree, they wanted you as an officer. That's wonderful. How did you decide to choose the Waves?
Well, they really chose me. I was recruited.
Oh, you were.
And my math, I took a lot of math, and one of my math teachers called me in and said, the Navy wants some women like you, and would you join up? And she said, I can't tell you what you'd be doing. And I was
must have
also
been-
20, and I had to get my parents' permission.
Oh, yeah.
So
Right.
I went home and asked them, and I said, I can't tell you what I'm going to be doing because I don't know.
That's pretty exciting.
And, but both of my brothers were in service, and they were very loyal, patriotic.
Oh, yes.
So they said yes. So after Christmas, the next semester began, and I was told to report to a class, a math class. But it turned out to be a class in cryptanalysis,
Oh,
and that's what I was. I was a cryptanalyst.
is that so?
Yes.
Oh, that is.
And there were perhaps 7 of us, and it's on my college record as a math class.
Uh-huh.
I think that I really was asked to do it because I had been in a class called mechanical drawing in my junior year, where you were given 2 sides of an object and you were supposed to draw the backside of it.
Oh, yes.
And that was a class that was run by somebody named Grace Hopper. If you know anything about computers, she eventually invented she practically invented COBOL, and she did lots of other things. But she went in the Navy
Uh-huh.
and was not there my senior year. And I think she's the one who probably,
Really influenced
yes,
you.
because I did well in her class, and she asked me to tutor students, but I'd already said I'd tutor for another class, and I couldn't
Right.
do both.
So now, well, I want to get this straight. That was at Vassar.
Mhm.
And then when did you go to Smith too?
Right after, I went to Smith, I think in May, and graduated in July,
I see.
and then went straight from there to Washington.
You became an ensign right then?
Became an ensign.
How
yes.
about that? And then to Washington. Pretty darned exciting.
And nobody, except for that one class at Vassar with the 7 of us who were asked to be in, nobody ever said anything to me about what I was going to do. And it was sort of marvelous at the end when I got to Communications Annex where I worked, that they knew about me and were expecting me because, I thought...
They were rubbing their hands, and you've been worried all this time.
Yes, whether this was all just fake or
I
mistake.
know. Well, of course, and it was very, very important because they didn't want to have any leaks about what you were going to be doing. And of course, cryptology, my God, that is so involved and so wonderful.
Well, I really didn't know what I would be doing, but what I ended
No.
up doing was working on Japanese naval codes.
Really?
Really,
Wow. Oh, that's exciting.
And that's what I spent my 2 years doing.
Oh, well, I can thank you then for probably helping save my life. 'Cause I spent over 3 years in the South Pacific.
Really? Where were you?
Well, from Guadalcanal through the Philippines, and but I was not at Midway. I was not at Coral Sea. I was in training at the time of the Battle of Coral Sea. However,
Lady Gulf? Lady Gulf?
oh, I was in Leyte Gulf. I was in the Battle off Samar, which was part of the Leyte Gulf campaign. I was in a little group of ships called Taffy 3. I don't know if you read about that or not.
Well, my brother was on an escort carrier.
Which one?
The Suwannee.
Oh, yeah, light carrier. That was a light carrier. That was on a cruiser hull.
I guess
Yeah.
so, but it was an
Yeah.
escort
And
carrier.
I was on a baby flat top, one of the smallest class of carriers. But I saw the Suwannee. I saw the Suwannee in the Marianas Campaign in 1944.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, isn't that's very, very interesting. Well, now the cryptology, and you tell about that because a lot of people don't understand what that is.
Well, it was all numeric. I didn't have to know Japanese.
Okay.
and they had 2 sets of codes. Well, I should say, maybe starting off, that the whole world is so different now. And there they depended on code books, and
Yes.
nothing, we could pick up the messages they sent back and forth. And then they were delivered to us, and I had 2 codes, and one was changed every month, and then one was changed maybe once a year.
Mm-hmm.
And they, at the beginning of every message, there was a date time code, and at the end of every message. And that obviously was significant because you'd get the same kind of thing on, and maybe the same information. So they had to be somehow together.
Coordinated.
And so we would get big books, and somebody had written out all these and lined them up according to these date time codes.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had to figure out what was the answer, what was the message. And I was only working with, see, there are different codes, one's for the diplomatic level and one is the most secret, and this has to do with convoys and weather stations, and
Sure.
but that was the heaviest traffic that we had.
And how about the location of fleets and so forth? Fleet.
You mean Japanese fleets?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that would be sort of a byproduct.
Oh, I see.
One of the things that was helpful is that the military mind always had a certain kind of message in the same absolute way. So that we'd get messages about weather and the language be all the same, except maybe for the critical word like sunny or stormy or something like that.
I see.
And that was a help. Now,
Right.
I don't really know how they got the very beginnings of the language code, so that once you started it, then you could go on from there. But to get started later on, as the Japanese effort was folding, collapsing,
Yes.
you'd get code books, maybe stuffed down the toilet, something like that.
Oh, I see.
As they were leaving the islands.
Right.
And then they would be sent
Moving
back
back
to
toward the empire,
Yes.
the homeland. Did you do any other language besides Japanese? That was
Well,
it?
that's not quite true. That's what we worked on until the war was over, of course.
Mhm.
And then we stayed on working on those messages for a couple of months, maybe afterwards, to clean them all up so everything would be translated, that could be translated.
I see.
Then we were all sent to different sections. And not surprisingly, there was a group of people who worked on British codes and people who worked on French codes and
German.
Russian codes.
Right.
And that's when I first ran into computers, because we would get what they called IBM runs,
Mm-hmm.
I think especially Russian codes, because that's where I was.
Huge machine.
Well, we just saw the printout,
Oh, you just saw the printout. I see.
and then you try and find patterns of some kind.
Sure.
But we never broke it at all.
Well, being in Washington during the war must have been just a fantastic experience. Because I think Washington is such an exciting city anyway, and particularly in wartime. And that war today, oh well, it's something else. But in those days, with patriotism, you know, as high as it was, and
That's right.
everyone was pulling for the same thing, in most cases, you know, the home front and as well as the military. So you went into Washington in late '44,
Middle of 44.
middle of '44, and where did you stay in Washington?
Well, the officers were not put up in barracks or anything
No.
like that. We just had to find our own
Apartment,
apartments, and I lived in probably 5 or 6 different places.
right in downtown Washington.
there were, lived in Chevy Chase. I lived near,
Oh, yes.
I lived in, what's the really wonderful part of Washington?
Bethesda?
No, right in Washington,
Oh,
where,
Northwest, you mean, the Northwest?
yes, it was Northwest. I'm sorry, I'm getting old and I'm losing names.
No, you're doing fine. I don't.
Anyway, I could take the bus home and then walk. We worked what we called watches around the clock,
Oh, yes.
which everybody else calls shifts.
24-hour duty, I
Well,
should say.
no, we went 8 hours,
Well, I mean the duties.
but I can remember Georgetown is what I'm.
Georgetown, oh, of course. Oh, my
Coming
God.
home at night, at midnight, by myself, and walking 5 or 6 blocks in Georgetown to get to where we lived. Never gave it a thought.
No,
It was a perfectly safe place to be.
I know, yeah. Oh, Georgetown is a beautiful part of town, but it's so different. The whole world is so different today.
Yes.
Well, in your work, for example, who was your immediate commander? Was that a woman?
No, it was a man.
It was a man.
And there were a great many academic people
Mm-hmm.
in that particular
Yes.
section. This was a very nice man who had taught English at the University of Minnesota.
Oh boy, good.
And I was in a department called Keys, Keys,
Mm-hmm.
because it was up to us to break the codes.
Really, you were a code
I
breaker.
was a code breaker.
Wow.
And then there were other rooms that actually translated
Uh-huh.
it, and other places that sent them off. But I can remember once being given a message that had just come in, and they wanted it deciphered as fast as they could, and so I was able to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And they sank the convoy as a result of,
Really?
and I was terribly pleased.
I should say. Well, that was a great accomplishment.
And I remember telling my daughter about this, or I guess the family about it, not too long ago. Well, 10 years ago, say. And she said, "Mother, how awful. How can you be so pleased? You've sunk all those, killed all those people." And I thought, oh, the world has changed, hasn't it?
The world has changed. There's a whole different mindset.
Yeah.
I know. Well, now, that's interesting. Was that convoy in the Atlantic or in the Pacific?
Everything was in the Pacific.
Everything you were constant. So that was a Japanese
So that-
enemy convoy.
That's right.
And that was, supply ships and so forth, troops and munitions they were carrying, and
Yes, no, not the Navy, not the Japanese Navy.
Okay.
That would be something else.
yes, I understand. Okay. Well, let me step back just a minute. When you went to Smith, what was that particular for? Why did you?
Teach me how to be a Navy officer.
Oh, that's how the Navy regs.
And,
How did you like that regulation type of life?
well, it was a shock, and you had to be there on time, and I'm not very good about being there on time, and you get a demerit, and you had to learn how to make up your beds to be sharp, ship-shape, and seaman-like.
Right, and salute smartly and all that sort of thing.
stuff, yes. And then you marched back and forth on the playing fields
You learned, oh yeah, yeah.
in the heat of
Learn.
July,
Yeah,
June.
on the grinder.
And if you fainted or something like that, tough luck, they just left you there.
Sure, yeah,
Stepped around you and
that's
walked
right,
on.
that's right. Well, that must have been quite something. How did you relate all this stuff to your parents, for example?
Oh, I think that probably not much, just because there was never time. But I do remember that D-Day happened while I was there.
June 6, 1944.
That's right. And nobody had a radio. Of course, there was no TV.
No
And there
TV.
was just a little handwritten note put up on the bulletin board saying that the invasion had started.
At Normandy.
You know,
Isn't that something?
you know.
Yeah, I know it. And
So I have a hard time remembering that date because it just, nothing was made of it.
isn't that something? How about that? Well, of course, you were deeply involved and concentrating on the program, whatever you were supposed to be doing. But yeah, that's surprising. You know something? This is something. D-Day, the 6th of June, 1944, was so huge. Do you know that the very next day, the 7th of June, was the day that the Allies marched into Rome and took over Rome? And if it hadn't been for the Normandy landings the day before, there would have been much more publicity about the capture of Rome, because the Allies had been moving up the boot of Italy.
Yes.
But that's something you can think about too. Did you spend any time outside of Washington?
You mean on Navy duty?
Yes.
No.
It was always right there.
Always right there.
And
And in the same building.
same building. And what building was that again?
Well, it had been a little school, and it was called the Communications Annex.
Communications.
Massachusetts and Nebraska, and catty corner across from American University. And I
Okay.
don't, is it still naval? You don't know.
The what?
He obviously recognized it, your friend
Oh.
over here. I thought you might know whether it was still a naval building. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. The Naval Historical Foundation is in one of those old buildings now, and I don't know exactly the one you're talking about. Was this down by the Navy Yards?
No, it was catty corner across the intersection of Massachusetts and Nebraska from American University.
From American
So you-
University. Okay, I know where that is, yes. Yeah.
And I suppose somewhere in there were some old buildings, because it had
Yeah.
a girls' school. Mostly it was all full of temporary buildings.
Sure. Well, do you remember the old Navy Department building on Pennsylvania Avenue? That
Yes.
big, almost a Gothic style building that doesn't exist anymore, but I remember seeing that during the war, and that was just an incredible place. How about some of your contacts, people that you contacted? Did you get in contact with anybody like Nimitz or King or any of the top admirals or anything like that?
No.
And I'm sure they kept you pretty secluded, didn't they?
Oh, yes.
You were there and,
We had to
and
go, show our badge as we walked through. and
security was very tight.
Marines.
Marine
checked us.
Guard and everything. Oh boy, that was pretty exciting.
But I think I went to a cafeteria in the place,
Uh-huh.
and then I went to another office after the war was over in the same building.
Right.
That's all I saw of the Navy, really.
Isn't that something? Well, and of course you were young. You were 22 years old when you went in there. Huh?
I was, strictly speaking, I graduated from college at 20,
Oh, that's right, you said
and
that.
so I was just 21.
Just 21. You must have been one of the youngest there.
Well,
Did they do any hazing or anything like that?
no,
No,
just going through that Smith College experience was enough hazing.
that was enough. Well, going back to that, that's true. And even for the women, of course, it was tough and rigorous. And but I suppose through your connections at Smith, or your experience at Smith, you met some nice people. Did you make friends and people that you kept in touch with later on?
Oh,
or-
yes, and there's still someone I keep in touch with.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
And I realize, thinking about it today, that it's been, 60 years?
Tell me about it. This is '07, and when you were there, that's 62 years ago.
Mhm.
Just imagine. It's hard to believe, isn't it?
But I was one of the, I think, last out of the Navy, because you remember you could leave because you had points.
Yes.
And I had never left the country. I really went in fairly late.
Yes.
And I never saw action, anything like that, so I didn't have very many points.
You had to build up your points.
Yeah.
When did you finally get discharged?
In August of 46.
46, yeah.
So
Well, that's interesting.
more than a year after the war was over.
Yeah. I stayed in a year after the war was over, too. I had, my college was interrupted, and I was originally in the class of 43.
Oh.
And I went in right after Pearl Harbor, so I had some catching up to do to get my degree after the war, but thank goodness for the veterans program, you know, that they have.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. Being there in Washington, I hope you have some good memories about that.
Oh, Washington was lovely. You know, I really didn't see an awful lot of it, I think. None of us had a car, so we...
Did you have social events?
Yes, just, I think, almost always just with different naval connections.
Right, right.
Occasionally somebody else
Yes.
come through. It was nice.
There were great hotels then there in Washington too, the Mayflower, the old Willard Hotel.
The Willard Hotel is the one I remember.
Yes, and that's still there. Have you been back to Washington recently?
Well, how recent is recently?
Well, I don't know, 10 years?
I've certainly been back to Washington numbers of times, but in the last 10 years I sort of doubt.
Well, so many things have been restored, you know, in Washington, like the Willard Hotel, for example. They've restored that to its original grandeur, and it's just magnificent. The reason I ask questions like that is that I'm so enamored of Washington, and people in your family will be happy to learn about what you say, about your what you've done. You had two brothers, one was older and one was younger, and where did they serve?
Well, my older brother was the one in the Navy on that escort carrier. The
Oh, yes,
Sewanee, and
on
he
the
was
Sewanee.
he was killed in the Battle of Lady Gulf.
Oh, he was? Oh.
It was a kamikaze.
Yep, plane.
And my younger brother was in the Marines, and he was in the Pacific in different places.
Uh-huh.
And he didn't like to talk about it at all afterwards.
That's too bad, yeah. You know, that's a very interesting point you bring up. That's a very common attitude. And we in our interview project find some people that are reluctant, don't even want to be interviewed. But if I'm a historian, and if I get somebody who says, oh, I don't want to talk about it, you know, I didn't do anything, or it's forgotten, it's history, I don't let them go. I gently work on them. And usually we can get people to submit to an interview, and then when they open up, and you open up beautifully, and you know, and you start telling things, and that's what's important about this project, because your history, and we've got to get that down, because the day is coming when we all go to that great harbor in the sky. But
wait till I tell my husband that you said I'm history.
Well, that's nice. I'm glad to know you've got a husband. That's wonderful. How did you come to? Okay, let's back up just a little bit. You got out of the Navy in August of '46. Then what happened?
Then, well, that's when I was trying to go to architecture school, and I ended up moving to Princeton because I got a job there as learning on the job, and it was one of those federally financed after the war programs.
Sure.
And so I worked with him until he went off to Los Alamos, I think, was that architect. And then I got another job drafting. And anyway, somewhere in there, I met my husband, who was a graduate student at Princeton.
Princeton.
And we got married and moved to Charlottesville, Virginia. Because
Beautiful place.
yes.
Did you like that, living in Charlottesville?
Oh, it was very pleasant, yes. It's a beautiful.
How long were you there?
3 years,
Now, and your husband was teaching there?
yes, in the Department of English. And then he got a job here at UC
Oh,
in the English department. And so
Oh, I
we've
see.
been here ever since.
oh, wow.
We moved here in '52.
52. And, well, then that was quite a change coming from the East Coast to the heart of America.
Well, he grew up in the Northwest, up in north of Seattle.
North of Seattle.
And so we go out there for a month or two in the summer. So
Oh,
we
you-
get a little bit of it all.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, I'm from Oregon.
Are you really?
So that, yeah, my wife and I came here in 1955.
From where in Oregon?
From, well, my wife's from Portland and I'm from Hillsboro, which is just west of Portland. And we're both graduates of Oregon State at Corvallis. And of course, I went back after the war to get my degree. My
Yes.
wife graduated, she's 5 years younger than I am. She graduated in '48. But I graduated with the class of '47. And that was an experience, a whole new experience, because we guys were quite a bit changed after the war, you know.
Sure.
We'd settled down, and we'd gotten some maturity and got some smarts.
Yes.
Well, that's interesting about your husband, because now you say north of Seattle, you're talking about Bellingham or,
Mount Vernon.
oh, Mount Vernon, Washington, sure.
That's his,
Oh,
that's
I-
his hometown.
Beautiful, oh my gosh. That's beautiful country out there. I still miss it.
And his father built a cabin on Puget Sound,
Oh my.
on Samish Island, if that means
Samish Island, I know Samish Island, I've been there.
So that's where we go.
Well, isn't that interesting? I have cousins on Mercer Island, and I have a cousin at Gig Harbor, and a cousin at Port Townsend. So I know that country very well.
Hot out there.
They've had a very hot time, and those terrible fires in the
Oh, no.
national forests and everything. Well, getting back to you, Betty, tell us about your time in Charlottesville. What did you do when you went to Charlottesville?
Not much.
You didn't do any drafting there or
No,
professional work?
I didn't work.
You didn't work, okay. And you were
I
starting to build
probably
a...
learned how to cook or do some things like
Sure,
that.
you're starting to build a family?
Our son, oldest, was born just a few months after we got to Cincinnati.
Oh, after
So
you got
we
here.
have 3 children.
3 children? Son and 2 daughters, or what?
Exactly.
Oh, isn't that nice? Are they all here?
None of them.
None of them,
Their son is in Bellingham,
okay.
and 1 daughter in St. Louis, and 1 daughter outside of Kalamazoo.
Oh, well,
It'd be
that's
very
not...
nice if one of them were here, but no.
Yeah, I know. We're very lucky. We have all our family and grandchildren are right here. Well, so in Charlottesville, there your husband was on the faculty at UVA?
Mhm.
Okay, and how long did you stay there?
We left there in '52.
That's when you came to Cincinnati.
Mhm.
And he was looking for something a little different? And,
He was an instructor there, and Virginia in those days was very pro-Virginian,
oh, yeah.
and the people that got promoted were all Virginians.
Virginians, very insular.
And very insular. So there was just no chance that he could be anything except an instructor.
I see.
And
Yeah.
so we looked elsewhere, and there were not very many jobs. And Cincinnati was still a municipal university when we
I
came
remember
here.
that.
It was really some very good people. in the
Oh,
English
yes,
department.
excellent.
Um,
Well, you remember Dr. Langsam, of course, as
Yes.
president.
I even
And-
remember Raymond Walters.
Raymond Walters, how about that? Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great. Where do you live here in Cincinnati?
In East Walnut Hills,
Oh, you do?
we lived in Clifton most of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
here. And then, about 10 years ago, when my husband was no longer really up to cutting the grass and all that sort of thing, we moved into a condominium.
Oh, you did? Well, we're neighbors then.
Where are you?
We're on Torrance Court,
Okay.
just
yes.
up above Torrance Parkway, just up above Columbia Parkway.
I know where that is. Yes, yes.
Now, are you over on Ingleside by any chance?
No, we're on Bond Place.
Oh,
We're-
yeah,
We're behind Columbia Towers.
sure. Well, that's very
So you're
nice.
really around the corner.
Yeah, I turn right up, I look at it every time I go home down up the river. And we have friends that live there too, yeah, yeah. Well, that is, now, so when you got here to Cincinnati, did you have your 3 children at that time?
Just one.
Just one?
Just one right after we moved.
Okay,
And then the other 2 came along rather promptly.
okay.
And that was all, but we've been here in the English department, except that he's had a number of sabbaticals. And so we spent 2 years at different times, a year at 2 different times, in England,
Oh,
So-
wonderful.
in Kensington, we
Mhm.
lived, and another time in Cambridge, and then shorter times in Shepherd's Bush, and another time
My
near the
goodness.
Taft Museum.
What is,
Tate Museum. Taft is,
what a stimulating experience and time that you've had, the 2 of you.
well, that first time when we took our 4-year-old son and our 2-year-old daughter and our 18 months old daughter, and you had to take the boat then, there were no.
That was a handful, wasn't it?
That was a handful.
My goodness, I should say.
That was determined our life that year.
You said, this is it, huh?
At least you could get diaper service.
I know. Now, when you took your family to England, did you, of course you had to have passports, right? And how did the British government handle small children? I mean, officially, did they have to have passports too?
My passport had the pictures of the 3 kids.
Oh,
They're all
I see.
together. So
So
we're all
that-
on one passport.
All on one passport, that included. Well, your experience then, you said at Cambridge, you were at Cambridge?
That first year we were in Kensington.
At
And
Kensington?
you worked at the British Library, British
Oh
Museum.
my, that is fascinating, yeah. Well, Kensington, that's right in London,
That's right.
sure, sure. And then then you came back from that?
And then about 8, 9 years later, we went back to Cambridge.
Okay,
That was the year the riots were here.
yes, 61, 62.
So 67, 68.
Oh, later, okay.
And I remember seeing, there was a TV in the house we rented, and seeing Cincinnati pictures, just sitting down there weeping.
Oh, yeah, it was really sad. Well, we lived on Wold Avenue at that time, and just off Madison Road, and I still can remember seeing the National Guard at the corner of Wold and Madison, sitting there in their trucks, just waiting to calm things down. Well, enough of that sad times here, but when you came to town, for example, Cincinnati had 3 newspapers, the Times-Star,
That's right.
remember that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
The Post.
The
The Post
Post?
is about to disappear.
Posts about to disappear, that's what they tell us. I want to go back a little bit, we've got some time, and I'd love to get more from you about your cryptography work and some of the specifics of it. You told us a little bit about that, how you had to match things up, different levels of information coming through. You were monitoring the Japanese all the time, right?
Yes. Monitoring doesn't seem quite the right word, but
No.
dealing with.
Dealing with it.
And the messages came to us, and excuse
Had
me.
they been filtered through something before they got to you?
Well, I don't think filtered is the right word, but you
Okay.
know, we didn't pick them up, somebody else
I
picked
see,
them up.
okay.
And the messages came in, well, I told you about the date time groups, the beginning and the end. And then the rest of it was in 6-digit
Mm-hmm.
numbers, space, 6-digit space. And you had to find, by lining these messages up,
Mm-hmm.
an additive, which is the word we used, that when you added it to these numbers there, would produce a recognizable number. That-
Another number.
Another number,
I see.
because the message had been translated into these numbers, and then
Right.
then when they wanted to send it, they added another bunch of numbers to it. And those second ones were aligned with the day and the month and the time of day.
Okay.
And so that's what it told you in those last two messages. And you could also see that these came in the clear.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be something like 12:02, being the 12th month and the second day, at 13:41,
Mm-hmm.
that being the time. And then at the end, it would be 12:02, 13, maybe 44,
I see.
always a little bit higher,
Sure.
because it was that time that the message was
Was
completed.
Right, transmitted.
You knew immediately that that had some meaning.
Yeah, that little lapse of time there
Yes.
meant something, yeah. Well, you know, I've read a lot about that in history. I didn't have any experience with that sort of thing in my duties in the Navy, but the Japanese, you know, in the beginning of the war, of course, they were so cocky, you know, they thought they were, you know, unbeatable, for one thing. And that's one of the reasons that we made great success early in the war by breaking the code, particularly at the time of the Battle of Midway and so forth.
Right.
And of course, that was before you got into the waves. But was that sort of thing, did they improve their cryptology at all later on in the war?
Well, as I understand about Midway, this we were told when I was in Washington, that somebody in Chicago, in one of the Chicago newspapers, published that this was after Midway, that
Yeah.
we were reading
Yeah,
their codes, and every code changed within 24 hours.
right. That's,
So everything
yeah,
set back and they had to start all over.
right. Yeah, I
You
wonder.
heard that story too?
Yes, yes, and yeah, as a matter of fact, there's I don't know if you ever see it or not, but there's a great magazine called Naval History. It's published in Annapolis, a wonderful magazine, and they had a big article about that just recently.
Really?
And it was the Chicago Tribune,
Yeah.
and Colonel McCormick, you know, who headed the Tribune at that time, and owned the newspaper, and was the publisher.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And I mean, it was almost traitorous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, it was seditious, you know, but you know, passed it over, and so things like that. And you know, a lot of people today don't realize some of those really very secretive type of things that went on during the war and how important they were. And you were a part of that. See that?
Well, of course, we couldn't talk about any of it
No.
to any of our families or anything. And I think that really lasted for about 20 years.
Yes.
And now the numbers of books that are coming out, say about the Enigma.
Oh, isn't it amazing?
Yes.
Yeah, it really is.
And I think it's the technology of it all has changed so much that
Yes.
it doesn't matter. We tell how it worked then.
No, and well, you know, there was in place, or still is in place, a War Secrets Act that protects people for a number of years, even after they die. Like, I think after World War II, it was 30 years before you could really get in, deep into the actual records of history, because people were still living at that time, even 30 years after the war.
Sure.
Now they're all gone, the people, and you and I are in our 80s, and so forth, but it was very, very important to keep that. And as you say, there must be a book a day coming out by different people, and some of them are very, very, very good, by fine authors.
Oh, yes.
Oh
yes.
my gosh, yes. Do you read a lot?
I try to. I don't seem to be reading as much as I used to. I don't read many books about the war, though.
You don't?
I don't read history.
You're not history?
I'm not history.
Oh, golly.
I'm more fiction and some other things, too.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Well,
I
I
don't
know.
read anything I don't have to.
Well, there are people here. Oh, let me ask you this. Do you know of the English-speaking union here in town? Are you a member of that? Oh.
Though they connected us with the one in London.
Yes.
The first time we went.
Sure.
And that was, one of the wonderful things about that trip.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Is that the English thought the Americans were wonderful.
Yes.
We were the great heroes.
You were warmly welcomed.
Yeah. And people wanted to meet us just because we were Americans.
Yes.
And we were entertained by all kinds of people. Wouldn't be true now.
Well, I know. You wonder about that, and we have some connections in England, and talking to people like from Procter & Gamble or General Electric that go to England, they say even though today they meet people who are still warm and welcoming over there because they remember.
Well, our friends
Yeah.
are still
Our friends
warm
do.
and welcoming, but
Sure.
this eagerness, just, find me an American so I can invite him to dinner and,
Yes.
that kind of thing. That wouldn't happen.
That must have been very, very supportive of you and your family.
Oh, it was lovely, yes.
And you met some wonderful people, I'm sure.
We did.
Did you meet any people in government over there, or were they all academics?
The only one, and he was no longer in the government, but he had been, was somebody named Harry Cruikshank, who actually was somehow a cousin of my husband's.
Really?
And he had been in Churchill's cabinet. Now, he was retired,
Yes.
well retired when we
Right.
saw him. He had retired and he'd been knighted, so he was Lord Cruikshank.
Isn't that something?
That was interesting.
Well, it's interesting, and I know you're aware of this too. The British make a lot of recognizing military history. They're very, very prominent in that. Of course, they have a great centuries-old tradition of that, from the empire and so forth. But I'm just fascinated about some of the academics you might have met who had served in World War II for Britain.
We probably did, and I don't really remember.
I see. I got you. What were your living conditions like over there when you lived at Cambridge and so forth?
Cambridge, we had a very nice house. In London, we had a nice house, but it was 4 stories and no central heat.
Oh, boy.
And the bathroom had no heat at all.
Really?
So,
What did you have, a fireplace or what?
yes, there was a fireplace in every room, a gas grate,
Gas grate?
and some of them had coal.
I know. It's hard for us Americans to realize.
And this was, 66, 67, I guess. 10 years after the war, at least, and coal was still rationed then.
Is that so?
And getting over the war was a long struggle for the British.
It really was. It was a terrible struggle. Yeah, their economy suffered so terribly. And of course, that's one of the reasons, I guess, their politics have gotten so, in my estimation, so goofy over there.
Well, of course, they were bombed, and
Yeah.
there's still lots of, especially in the East End, I think,
Yeah.
buildings that were a mess. Nothing.
You
had been
saw a
constructed.
lot of that even
Yeah.
when you were there,
Yes.
I should say. Golly. Do you still have connections with anybody over there? You still
Oh,
keep
yes,
in touch?
yes. Somebody we met the very first time, I mean, that time in London. He's gone, but she's still there.
Uh-huh.
And then another couple, he was in the classics department here for a while, and he was an archaeologist
Oh,
and
my.
working in Cyprus, and he asked me to go along and bring up, I was working in the computer services at UC at that time,
Mhm.
and bring the very first portable computer anybody had ever heard of, which was
Really?
the Osborne.
Wow.
And so I worked with him 2 different summers.
Well,
in
you're a
Cyprus.
pioneer. Now, what was your family name?
Bigelow, B-I-G.
Bigelow. Oh,
B-I-G-E-L-O-W.
that's a prominent name too.
Proper
yeah.
names.
Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. Well then, and then your husband, does he come from Scottish stock, Stewart?
I suppose, but he really doesn't know, excuse me, where his family really came from.
Mm-hmm.
He can trace his family back to 18th century in New Jersey or Pennsylvania.
Ah,
And
revolutionary time.
But the British were giving the Scots a very hard time in the early part of the 18th century.
Yes.
Culloden and other things. And I think a lot of Scots left then. But just when his family did and
Mhm.
where they came from,
Mhm.
they might even come from Ireland. You know?
Sure. Oh yeah. Well, that's interesting that you know, you come out of that his background. And how about the Bigelows?
Oh, the Bigelows came from England in really 17th century.
Hmm.
Well, I had an uncle who was an avid genealogist.
Well, that helps.
But the interesting thing to me about it really is that they discovered that there are no Bigelows in Britain. That's not a
Really?
name that's known there. So whether it's the Bigelow that came over in 1640
Mm-hmm.
was a thief and running away from justice,
Mm-hmm.
or whether he just was a bad speller,
Right.
illiterate.
That could be
But
too.
there,
Sure.
and if you go to London now and look up Bigelow in the telephone book, it's not there.
It's not there.
Isn't that-
I always assumed that was a long time Anglo-Saxon name. Yeah.
all the way back to 17.
Well, that's recent history. Well, anything else come to mind about your Navy experiences, your
No.
weight? What did you get to JG and lieutenant?
I
Or
got to be a JG.
good for you. That's great. Got that extra half stripe.
Yes, that's right. And I stayed in the reserve for, well, I guess until I started having a family. And then I thought,
I see.
it's time to
Sure.
resign.
Yeah. Well, that, and you know that, of course, the GI Bill for the people that came back having served was one of the greatest things that this country ever did.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It just built up our strength so rapidly. Unlike, you know, European countries didn't have anything like that. Of course, the Western countries in Europe were devastated.
But we did some marvelous things after the war,
Yes.
and some marvelous things for Europe.
Oh, yeah. The Marshall Plan.
Marshall Plan's what I'm thinking about, you know.
Yeah, I should say. Well, this is one thing that, you know, that we have to brag about. I mean, we've got such a great country here, and so many people are trying to tear it down. And they don't, younger generations they're not being taught the way you and I were in school in those days.
We could use another GI Bill.
Absolutely, you know, and they're not taught history seriously here. They don't study geography anymore. It just breaks my heart, because do you ever speak to any school groups or anything like that? Tell your story? You should. There are programs around. And UC has a nice history program where they invite people in to talk about their experiences, you know.
Well, you're probably aware of the ILR program.
I've been a moderator there for 10 years.
Oh, have you? Okay.
Yep.
Well, I talked to a group, class there.
On what?
On just what we've been talking about.
Good for you. Good for you.
And Saul Marmer, I think, put together a whole
Saul Marmer, sure.
a whole program of veterans like me.
Yeah, he's wonderful. He's very, very effective.
Now, what have you been teaching?
Well,
Moderating?
I've done. I like to do it out at Raymond Walter's campus because.
Everybody likes Raymond Walter's
Oh
best.
yeah. Well, it's free parking, you know, for one thing, and it's easy to get in and out.
That's right.
This main campus is such a maze and a warren of.
Absolutely.
I don't know, you know, but anyway, you know, I knew Aaron Levine very well, and when he got started, I've done naval history and I've done American Revolutionary War history and Civil War.
Yeah.
I love American history, and I even did I love Russian history. I even did one course several years ago on Russian history, and that was fun. But no, that's a great program. And now they've changed it to
ILE.
Institute for Lifetime Education.
That's right.
But everybody still says ILR. Well, you should do more of that, Betty, because you've got so much to talk about. I think it's just wonderful. If you had
Thank you very much.
You have to have the inclination, of course, but we're running down towards the end of our time. And we still have a couple of minutes. If you can think of anything else or anything else.
I think I've told you everything I know.
Oh my goodness. You've opened up your heart to us. That's wonderful. Well, now your family is going to enjoy seeing you on DVD.
I don't know that I will, but maybe they will.
Well, don't you worry about it. You've just done beautifully, and it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you here. And you will get a DVD for you and your family, and a copy will stay here, and a copy will be sent to the Library of Congress. So you're in the archives forever.
All right.
How about that? Does that impress your husband?
It might.
Well, I hope I have the opportunity to meet you again. It's just been a great pleasure and an honor, and you know, anchors away.
Okay.
Keep them
Thank you.
flying.